CBS News senior security contributor and former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morell is here. Mike, let me just start off by asking you, what does this tell us, the attacks? What do they tell us about ISIS and its capabilities?
So 9 to 12 months before the Paris attacks, ISIS put in place a very sophisticated attack capability. We now, with the Paris investigations, know just how sophisticated that was. Throwaway phones, multiple bomb makers with multiple bomb-making facilities, document forgery, the use of encrypted communications, very sophisticated, right? So that played out again now in Brussels. So this network is in place, it's sophisticated, and it has not been degraded. That's the number one thing it tells me.
What about the counterterrorism efforts? Is this an intelligence failure?
So I don't think so. I think that's a little unfair at this point. I think that what you have is you have a situation where you have European law enforcement and intelligence authorities facing this very sophisticated terrorist target, right? And then you've got huge numbers. 5,000 Europeans went to fight with ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Some of them are still there. Some of them died on the battlefield. Some of them are starting to come home, right? And those guys, battlefield experience, hardened jihadists, they're the real threat going forward, and that's what we saw play out in Paris. That's what we saw play out in Brussels. It's tough to get your arms around that, particularly when they're using kind of the sophisticated encrypted technology that they're using. It's tough to find them.
What about the challenges that officials face in Europe in trying to find terrorism? Because the question, of course, a lot of Americans have is, could that happen here?
So ISIS has said, we want to do the same thing in the United States. We want to conduct those kind of attacks here. Sometimes it's very important to listen to what your adversaries say. Sometimes they tell you exactly what they want to do. That's what bin Laden did. That's what ISIS is now doing. Building the same kind of attack capability in the United States is much more difficult than it is in Europe for all sorts of reasons, but it's not impossible, right? And we really don't have a window into where they are in the process of trying, whether they're at the very beginning, whether they're well into it, whether they're at the end of it. We don't have a picture. I think we have to assume that at some point, unless we degrade these guys, they will develop that capability here.
So I just want to be clear on this. Are you saying that it is possible there could be ISIS cells here in this country?
Yes, absolutely. And Jay Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland Security, in a statement he put out today, said exactly the same thing.
And so what kind of tools do U.S. officials have compared to, the officials in Europe, right, in terms of being able to go after? Because, of course, we've seen the encryption debate playing out with Apple and the Department of Justice. Right. Are U.S. officials equipped to fight this terrorism battle?
So I think there's two things we have to do. One is play defense. And in playing defense, I think there's two things that you have to focus on. One is Al-Qaeda was always focused on the big symbolic targets on the far side of security. You had to get through security, right, to get on an airplane to bring it down. These guys, ISIS, they're focusing on the soft targets, on the near side of security, right? The airline counters, right, in the airport were on this side of security, not the far side. So we're going to have to adjust our security protocols to address what they're doing. That's a big thing we have to do. The other thing we have to do is we have to get better intelligence, right? We have to be able to penetrate these groups at the local level. We're having a hard time reading their communications. We're going to have to penetrate them the old-fashioned way with spies to find out what it is they're doing. And that's the defense. The other big piece is the offense. What we learned in dealing with Al-Qaeda is you have to take the fight to them. You have to remove their senior leadership from the battlefield in rapid succession, and you have to take away their safe haven. At the end of the day, this problem does not go away until you do those two things.
Mike, I want to turn specifically to what we know happened in Brussels, and we're now learning that apparently these men were wearing black gloves on their left hand, which may have concealed a triggering device, a detonator of some kind. What do we know about that?
So the investigation is just beginning. We don't know a lot at this point. I think we can assume that Salah Abdeslam was involved with this particular group. I would bet that they had a number of plots planned, particular targets laid out. I think his arrest probably accelerated this operation because they were concerned, right, that he would talk to law enforcement authorities, they would all get arrested and this attack be disrupted. So I think they accelerated it. We'll find out. But the investigation is really just beginning.
And Mike, I guess lastly, you know, what is it that ISIS wants with these Western nations, with us? You have talk now on the political, the rhetoric is talking about, you know, closing borders, sealing up borders, getting tough. There are polls that show in the Republican Party, a majority of Republican primary voters want to see a temporary ban on Muslims entering the United States. They support that idea.
Right.
What do you think about that? What do you think about the notion of closing up borders?
Yeah, so you can't seal the border, right? The border's porous. Particularly the Canadian border is porous, right? So you can't seal the border. But even if you could seal the border, the problem is right here at home, right, with these young men and women who are being radicalized. So they're already inside of our borders, right? So you can't solve the problem by closing the borders, even if you could do that.
What is it the U.S. can offer as sort of a other vision than what the jihadis are offering? What is it that U.S. officials can do in terms of ideology to try and fight some of these ideas?
So this is really hard, right? It's really hard because the ideology is rooted in the jihadist views of what their religion says to them that they should be, how they should be behaving and how they should be acting and how they should be conducting themselves vis-a-vis us. So we don't have a lot of credibility with a counter-narrative, right? Because we're not Muslim, right? That counter-narrative really needs to come from Muslim countries, the leaders of Muslim countries, the clerics in those countries, and the parents and the teachers. That's where the counter-narrative has to come from.
All right. Mike Morell, thank you so much for your time.
It's great to be with you.